If you buy a priceless painting, you put it behind museum glass.
Oh, absolutely. You lock it in a vault.
Exactly. You preserve it, you guard it with your life. But in the world of classic American muscle cars, collectors are torn in two violently different directions.
Ah, it's a completely split camp.
Half of them want to treat these vehicles like archaeological digs.
Yeah.
Preserving them down to the original factory chalk marks on the undercarriage.
Right. The purists.
For the other half,
Yeah.
they want to rip the floorboards out, bolt on a supercharger, and build a multi-million-dollar monster.
Yeah.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today our mission is to examine a true cultural and automotive icon, the 1970 Dodge Challenger.
And we are looking at this canvas through two extreme lenses. We've pulled material from three highly detailed automotive breakdown videos to do this. Specifically, sources from Muscle Care of the Week, Autotopia LA, and V8 TV.
It's great channels.
Yeah, really detailed stuff. They highlight a pristine, historically significant factory race homage known as the Challenger TA, which is painted in a color that basically breaks every rule of automotive marketing.
It really does.
And on the other end, they showcase a modern, hand-built, $500,000 custom-built, appropriately named Havoc.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to understand why a modern builder would pour $500,000 into modifying a 1970 Challenger today, we really have to look at 1970.
The context is everything.
Right. This was the absolute peak of the golden era. The horsepower wars were raging, but there was blood in the water.
There was. The environmental regulations and fuel crises that would eventually strangle the muscle car era were, just over the horizon. But more immediately, insurance companies were waking up.
They were panicking, basically.
Exactly. They looked at these massive, overpowered, relatively cheap cars getting into accidents and started slapping astronomical premiums on them. I mean, sales began to slump hard. Automakers were backed into a corner, and they had to get incredibly creative.
Which is where the Sports Car Club of America, or SCCA, comes into the picture. They ran the Trans Am racing series. And for anyone picturing two cars driving straight for a quarter mile a race it.
Yeah, this wasn't drag racing.
Not at all. Trans Am was brutal road racing. Heavy braking, sharp left and right turns, high-speed straightaways. It pushed chassis dynamics to the absolute limit. And the SCCA had this strict homologation rule for any manufacturer wanting to compete.
They demanded that automakers actually sell the race car to the public.
Which is wild.
It is. If Dodge wanted to put a Challenger on the Trans Am starting line, they had to build and sell at least 500 street-legal versions of that exact vehicle to everyday buyers.
I love trying to explain this concept to people outside the car world because the underlying logic is so funny to me. It would be like the government telling an aerospace company they are forced to sell military jet fighters at the local dealership down the street just to be allowed to fly them in a competition.
That's a great way to put it. It's an aggressive mandate. But it forced manufacturers to take top-tier, track-level engineering and put it directly into the hands of the public.
The ultimate trickle-down tech.
Right. That mandate laid the very foundation for the muscle car legend we romanticize today, though it created some bizarre corporate dynamics too. For instance, the TA in Challenger TA literally stands for Trans Am. But Dodge didn't actually own the rights to the name Trans Am.
Wait, Pontiac owned it, right?
Yes. Pontiac had licensed it directly from the SCCA.
So Dodge couldn't even use the full name.
No, they couldn't. Pontiac actually had to pay the SCCA $5 per car just to use the name on their Trans Am models. So Dodge, circumventing that whole legal mess, just abbreviated their car to TA.
$5 a car just for the sticker on the side. That's hilarious. But let's look at what Dodge was forced to stuff under the hood to meet those SCCA rules. Because, the engine tells the whole story of this era.
It really does. The factory TA featured a 340 cubic inch V8 equipped with what they called a six-pack.
Which is 3 two-barrel carburetors feeding air and fuel into the engine, right?
Exactly. But here is where the engineering gets heavily influenced by bureaucracy. The SCCA track limit for engine size was actually 305 cubic inches. Dodge built a special destroked 305 specifically for their track cars.
But not for the street cars.
Right. For the mandatory 500 street versions they had to sell, they didn't want to deal with warranty claims on fragile, highly strung track parts, so they gave the street drivers a heavier-duty 340 cubic inch block instead.
And the factory advertised that 340 street engine at 290 horsepower and 290 foot-pounds of torque. But, anyone who knows muscle car history knows those numbers are essentially a corporate fairy tale.
What's fascinating here is that Dodge deliberately manipulated the testing parameters to dodge those insurance companies we talked about earlier.
They totally cooked the books.
Yeah, they rated the engine's horsepower at a much lower RPM than its peak. This was a high-revving, free-flowing engine. If you spun it up to its full potential near redline, it was producing well over 320 horsepower.
Wow.
They essentially lied on official documentation so ordinary people could actually afford to insure the car.
The classic white lie, like, don't worry, Mr. Insurance Agent, it's just a modest 290 horsepower, perfectly safe for a Sunday drive.
Exactly. It was an art form in 1970.
But when we pivot and look at the modern custom build, Havoc, that subtlety is entirely gone. Havoc doesn't toe the line with insurance companies or track rules. It just obliterates the line.
Oh, completely. Havoc features a 572 cubic inch all-aluminum Hemi engine.
That is massive.
And on top of that massive displacement, they bolted a ProCharger F3R direct crank-driven supercharger. The final output is 2,500 horsepower.
Wait, I need to pause on that number because humans are just terrible at visualizing scale. 2,500 horsepower.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
To put that into perspective, the average daily commuter car today makes, about 180 horsepower?
Give or take, yeah.
So you're essentially taking the combined explosive power of 14 Honda Civics, bolting it into a 1970 chassis, and forcing all that violence through 2 rear tires.
It's ridiculous. The physics of that shouldn't work. I mean, the torque alone would twist a stock 1970 Challenger frame like a wet towel.
Which brings up the obvious question. How do you take a crank-driven supercharger, which is physically stealing power directly from the engine's crankshaft to compress massive amounts of air, and translate that into forward momentum without just instantly melting the tires into a puddle of rubber?
Well, you completely re-engineer the vehicle's structural geometry.
Okay.
You cannot put hypercar horsepower into a 50-year-old chassis without entirely altering its stance and silhouette to handle the load. Let's look at the visual language of both cars, starting with the original TA, because form followed function beautifully in 1970.
Right, the TA had a uniquely aggressive stance straight off the showroom floor. It came with a functional fiberglass hood featuring a massive snorkel scoop to feed those carburetors. But what I find fascinating is that the hood wasn't painted shiny to match the body.
No, it was finished in a rough satin black texture called Organasol.
Organasol. And
But-
that wasn't just for looks, right?
Not at all. That finish was a direct request from the racing teams. A massive, brightly painted hood acts like a mirror under the sun. The rough black texture absorbed light, dramatically reducing glare for the driver when they were hurtling around a track at 140 miles an hour.
That is so cool. The stance was also revolutionary for a street car. The Challenger TA was actually the first American factory vehicle sold with staggered tire sizes. They put shorter E615 tires on the front and taller, wider G6015s on the rear.
Yeah, and staggering the tires physically drops the nose of the car. It creates a rake angle that shifts the static weight slightly forward. That gives the front tires better steering grip entering a corner, while the wider rear tires provide more contact patch for acceleration out of the corner. It was literal track geometry sold to the public.
But achieving an aggressive, planted look on a modern build like Havoc requires, a much more invasive surgery.
Yeah.
They didn't just tweak the suspension. They ripped out the 1970 floor plans completely. Havoc sits on a custom, structurally rigid Roadster shop chassis.
And it uses a RideTech shockwave suspension. So instead of traditional steel coil springs, it uses heavy-duty airbags.
Oh, so it can literally sit on the ground.
Yeah, the driver can depressurize the system so the car physically rests its frame rails on the concrete at a car show, and then pump compressed air back in to raise the vehicle for driving.
It allows them to fit wheels that are just comedic in scale. Havoc runs American Legend wheels,
Yeah.
20 by 8 inches in the front and a massive 20 by 15 inches in the rear, wrapped in Mickey Thompson tires.
You basically need a 20-inch wide steamroller just to have a prayer of finding traction with 2,500 horsepower.
Exactly.
But the builders, Rides by Ken Karam, they didn't stop at the chassis. They physically sharpened the actual metal lines of the car. The iconic Coke bottle styling of the Challenger is preserved, but every single edge is crisper. The glass is entirely flush-mounted to the body, completely eliminating the chunky chrome trim typical of the 1970s.
I have to stop you there, though, because there's one aesthetic choice on Havoc that sparks a lot of debate.
The door handles.
Yes, they used flush Aston Martin-style door handles, the kind that tuck away seamlessly into the door panel. That sounds like putting a tuxedo bow tie on a heavyweight boxer. Doesn't delicate European hardware kind of ruin the aggressive American muscle vibe?
Well, a lot of purists argue exactly that muscle cars should have big mechanical chrome handles you can grab with a fist, but from a fabrication standpoint, the logic is sound.
How so?
When you build a sleek, uninterrupted silhouette, any chunky 1970s chrome hardware becomes a visual speed bump. The flush handles force your eye to slide cleanly down that sharpened metalwork without snagging. It showcases a level of craftsmanship that simply didn't exist in a 1970 factory.
The gapping craftsmanship is stark. I mean, Dodge had to use some very clever, but ultimately cheap, visual illusions to make the TA look finished on a tight budget. They painted the quarter panel lips black and the top of the deck lid black directly under the spoiler.
They did that to hide the body color seams showing through where the spoiler mounted. Retooling the metal to make it fit perfectly would have cost millions, so they just used black paint as a camouflage.
Wow.
Havoc, on the other hand, relies on flawless, millimeter-perfect custom metal fabrication. There are no illusions, just thousands of hours of perfectionism.
Havoc uses flawless metalwork to draw the eye, but in 1970, Dodge didn't have the time or the budget for that kind of perfection. They needed a cheaper, faster way to combat their slumping sales and grab buyers by the lapels, and their weapon of choice, psychological warfare through color.
Yes, the legendary high-impact paint colors. In the spring of 1969, to combat market saturation and drag foot traffic into dealerships, Dodge introduced these wild, almost neon paint codes.
Colors like green go. And Plymouth had their own version of the exact same bright green, but they named it Sassy Grass.
The names were as obnoxious as the paint.
They really were. But the showstopper and the color of the specific TA featured in our sources is paint code FM3.
Dodge called it Panther Pink. Plymouth called it Moulin Rouge. It is a blindingly bright magenta, and it is exceptionally rare. Overall, Dodge only built about 2,399 Challenger TAs in total to satisfy the SCCA, with around 4,410 of those equipped with automatic transmissions.
Which brings up a massive piece of lore in the muscle car community. For decades, the accepted historical fact was that Dodge only ever painted exactly 27 Challenger TAs in Panther Pink.
Ah, yes, the 1 of 27 rule. It's repeated at almost every car show you go to.
Right. But the sources clarify this beautifully, breaking down why that myth is completely false. Online registries, where owners physically document the VINs of surviving cars, have already surpassed 27 accounted for Panther Pink TAs. And the crazy part is that experts estimate the registry currently only accounts for about 30% of total production.
So the real number is likely double or triple that myth. The confusion stems from Chrysler's internal accounting in 1970. They often tracked production options in percentages rather than exact tallies.
Ah, that makes sense.
Half a century later, trying to reverse engineer exact build numbers from rounded percentages leads to massive historical errors.
Even if there are 100 of them out there, it remains a total unicorn. But, I look at a Panther Pink TA and see a deeply ironic paradox. You have this aggressive, track-ready beast designed with a nose-down racing stance and a matte black fiberglass hood, and it's painted a color traditionally viewed by society as delicate.
In 1970, that paradox was a spectacularly tough sell. There's a famous, well-documented story of a dealer who received a brand new Panther Pink TA. It just sat on the showroom floor for months. Nobody wanted it. Nobody. The average buyer wanted a dark green or black car that wouldn't draw the attention of the police or their insurance agent. The dealer finally got so desperate to clear the inventory that they pushed the 0-mile car into the paint booth and sprayed it black just to make a sale.
Oh man, that is physically painful to hear. A dealer sanding down a factory Panther Pink TA. Because today, the psychology of the car buyer has completely inverted.
It's the exact opposite now. Today, rarity and polarizing options are the sole drivers of auction value. People pay massive premiums specifically to stand out, which is the complete opposite of the 1970 buyer.
Which points to an even larger issue. The concept of market value and the sensory experience. Because whether you are hunting down a rare Panther Pink Survivor at a Barrett-Jackson auction, or you're commissioning a 2,500 horsepower build like Havoc, these cars have evolved from transportation into ultimate status symbols. What is a buyer actually handing over their money for?
They are paying for an exclusive sensory experience. They are paying for how the machine interacts with their nervous system.
Let's analyze the sensory feedback of the factory TA first. You have the smell of unburned fuel from those 3 carburetors, and the mechanical vibration of the manual Hurst shifter right in your hand. But the defining characteristic is the exhaust. The TA featured a megaphone-style side exhaust that dumped out right in front of the rear tires.
And exiting the exhaust before the rear axle serves a mechanical purpose. It dramatically shortens the length of the exhaust pipe.
which means less back pressure.
Exactly. The engine doesn't have to fight to exhale its own spent gases. It breathes easier, which creates more power. But the byproduct of that short pipe is a raw, deafening race car rumble that vibrates right up through the floorboards directly into the driver's seat.
It's an immersive auditory assault. Now, contrast that visceral factory experience with the hyper-curated sensory overload of the Havoc build. Havoc debuted at the massive SEMA show in 2019, front and center in the Megwares booth. It's literally designed to stop traffic.
Yeah.
But the interior is where the builder made some truly wild sensory choices.
The treatment of the transmission tunnel is a masterclass in this. In almost every vehicle on Earth, the transmission tunnel is buried under thick, sound-deadening, heavy carpet or a plastic center console. You are insulated from the mechanics.
Right.
But in Havoc, the raw, custom-shaped metal of the transmission tunnel runs fully exposed right through the center of the cockpit.
It forces an intense mechanical connection between the driver and the drivetrain. You can literally feel the ambient heat and the high-frequency vibration of a 2,500 horsepower driveline inches from your leg.
Yeah, you can't escape it.
And they paired that raw, aggressive metal with high-end spaceship tech. Dakota digital gauges, push-button ignition, an iPad seamlessly integrated into the dash, and a machined Ring Brothers shifter.
You also see a fabrication technique heavily utilized in aerospace in their dimple die metalwork.
Oh, I saw that. What exactly is that?
Throughout the engine bay, the firewall, and the interior of Havoc, the builders punched holes in the metal panels and flared the edges. Punching the hole removes unnecessary weight, while flaring the edge adds immense torsional rigidity. It's a functional engineering trick that they elevated into a full aesthetic theme.
It's an incredible blend of raw mechanical violence and rolling sculpture. But then we hit the number that stops everyone in their tracks. The estimated sale price for Havoc, once it finishes its show circuit, is right around $500,000. $500,000 for a 1970 Dodge Challenger.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when you hear $500,000, you have to separate the cost of the parts from the cost of the time.
Yeah, the labor.
Exactly. You aren't just buying a massive Hemi block and custom wheels, you are paying for thousands of hours of highly skilled human labor. The team at Rides by Calanum built the custom exhaust entirely from scratch, bending and welding pipe from the engine headers all the way to the back bumper. They fabricated the entire interior in-house, stitching the upholstery and shaping the metal. That level of comprehensive in-house fabrication is incredibly rare.
It brings us full circle to the canvas metaphor. The 1970 Dodge Challenger really serves as the ultimate automotive Rorschach test. For some, like the stewards of the Panther Pink TAs, it is a perfectly preserved time capsule. A snapshot of the Trans Am homologation wars, complete with cheap factory paint tricks, fiberglass hoods, and the desperate marketing psychology of a bygone era.
And for others, like the creators of Havoc, it is a $500,000 playground. It's a foundational shape used to push the absolute physical limits of modern engineering, metal fabrication, and forced induction horsepower.
It's a testament to the original design that one singular car can successfully hold both of those extreme identities without losing its soul. I mean, whether it has 290 horsepower or 2,500, it is still undeniably, unmistakably a Challenger.
It definitely holds its ground as a defining silhouette of the 20th century. But this entire journey from 1970 to today raises a fascinating sociological question.
Oh.
We know that 50 years ago, a dealership had to take a brand new Panther Pink Challenger and spray it black just to convince a reluctant buyer to take it off the lot. And today, someone is eagerly willing to spend $500,000 on a 2,500 horsepower, custom fabricated mutation of that exact same car. What does that drastic shift say about our cultural definition of value?
Right. What are we actually valuing in the history, the performance, or just the pure spectacle of it all?
And looking forward, think about where the automotive industry is heading right now with silent, efficient electric vehicles. Will a deafening, gas-guzzling 2,500 horsepower mechanical beast like Havoc seem just as quaint or just as polarizing to buyers in 50 years as that pink paint job was back in 1970?
That is a great point. Will the collectors of the future look back at Havoc and just shake their heads at our obsession with raw, unbridled horsepower and exposed transmission tunnels? It really makes you wonder what the museum glass of the future will actually be protecting. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.